If God exists, how did he determine what's right or wrong? Did he just pick randomly? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. This is the second part of the series on the Euthyphro Dilemma. And the dilemma looks something like this. If God exists, what makes things good and evil? Does God get to pick what's right or wrong? Or is it that things were right or wrong before God chose? In the first video, we considered the option that God picks based on what is already right or wrong. And we said that there were some problems with that option, that it might interfere with God's omnipotence, his sovereignty, his free will. It's hard to see how these things could be true apart from God. Now we're going to check out the second horn of this dilemma. And it looks something like this. God will decide all the different things that will be right or wrong. Now, if you remember from our last video, I picked two different things, one that is clearly good and one that's clearly evil, helping innocent people, or saving innocent lives, I should say, and torturing babies for fun. Why is the first one good and the second one evil? Well, on this option, God would just pick whatever he likes. So, torturing babies for fun? Meh, let's make that evil. Saving innocent lives? Good. For you guys that love labels, you can call this divine command theory, or DCT. Now, why would this option be a problem? Likely, you've already sniffed out one of the problems, which is that, couldn't God have just chosen the reverse then? You know, why choose the way that he chose? He just randomly picks? On the other view, God chose what's good or evil because it just already was good or evil. But on this view, there doesn't seem to be any truth before God decides about whether torturing babies for fun is an evil thing or not. So it seems like God is just picking at random, and boy, that arbitrariness sort of, gives you in the gut like a little, I just don't like that. Now, one possible response to this objection that I don't necessarily like, but I don't know what I think about it, is this. The force of the objection is that we picture God sitting there, picking between things, and we see, what if he had picked the other way? What if he had picked that torturing babies for fun would be good? That universe would be awful. Ugh. And it easily could have been, if not for dumb luck, no thanks to God. But then what would happen if God had chosen that universe? Then we likely would think that the universe that we inhabit right now would be abhorrent. Again, not sure what I think about this one, but the idea is that maybe we can't judge different possible moralities based on our perspective from this current universe because we kind of have that revulsion built in. And speaking of the way God chooses, segue alert, some people argue like this. It's good when we act rationally, and God is perfect. So God must be perfectly rational. Now, to act rationally is to act for a reason. On the previous view, God's reason for saying that torturing babies for fun is evil is because it was evil. Pretty good reason. But on this view, God doesn't have any reasons for picking one over the other. So this would be a decision without any reason. That would make this decision irrational, not rational, not irrational, right? But without rationality. And that would be a bad thing. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure that this is a very good objection. It reminds me a lot of Buridan's ass. And if you haven't heard that, I mean donkey. Yeah, but that's the way everybody says it, Buridan's ass. So John Buridan was a philosopher, ancient philosopher. I should say medieval philosopher. And I'm going to sort of change his scenario up here just a little bit, but just pretend that you have a donkey that is sitting perfectly equidistant between two exactly, identical carrots. And he's very hungry, but there's nothing that's different between one side and the other side. He stands in the middle there and he considers, which way should I go? Well, I don't have any reason for choosing one over the other. What's he gonna do? Sit there and starve? No, it seems like you just randomly choose. I'll just go that way. I don't know. And maybe we have some reason why, maybe he's a lefty versus a righty, and so he goes left first. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The whole point is, there doesn't seem to be anything just awful about choosing at random sometimes, right? What would be wrong if God just flipped a coin? It would be more foolish to not create because you couldn't pick. So what I'm not saying is that it's good that God chooses just willy-nilly what is good and evil. What I am saying is I'm not sure that this objection works because I don't see that there's anything so wrong with choosing at random every once in a while. The next objection is a little bit more difficult. On the first option, there exists a standard about what's good and evil. Torturing babies for fun is evil because according to that standard, it just is evil. But on this option, there is no such standard of good and evil. God gives a command, save innocent lives because it's good. But what makes following that command good? If there's no external standard of good and evil, it seems like following God's commands isn't necessarily good in the first place. Now, of course, God could command you to follow his commands. He could command it to be good. But then again, that seems like a vicious circle. What makes that command good? So, whereas our first option already had this kind of good and evil built into it, this second option doesn't start with a good or evil. So it's difficult to see how that good and evil gets attached to these commands. Now, I have, for you logicians, I have a bit of a tu quoque response to this. And it's not that, I don't like either one of these horns of the dilemma, so I choose a different route. If you know the Euthyphro Dilemma, you probably have already guessed what I'm going to say in the next video. But I do think that the people who choose this option are really in no worse straits than the people that chose the first option, and here's why. There are all kinds of standards. There's standards on how to play a game, standards on how to drive in the United States. We could invent a standard right now, and we could say people follow this standard so long as they always brush the sand off their feet before they get into their cars. My friend Razzie hates it when I bring sand into his car. I don't care. I kind of like sand in my car. It reminds me that I just went surfing. Now, why is it that the standard that says don't torture babies for fun, do save innocent lives, why is it that this standard gets this special good and evil kind of designation? You may say, because it just does, right? That's just what the standard is. But then again, why couldn't we say the same thing about God's commands? They're just those kinds of commands. Commands that the good and evil designation just comes with. Or if you like, they have the obligation built in. I mean, it seems no less mysterious than this standard that's floating around out there that gets the good and evil signs. So I don't really think people that have chosen this option are in a worse place than people that chose the first option. Interestingly, I actually think they both have a problem here. And I think it's the same problem that political philosophy faces. You know, people make fun of the divine right of kings, and for good reason, right? It seems absurd to say, Mr. King, why do you get to rule? Well, because God said I could, right? He gave me this is my divine right. What? Where did you get that? But otherwise, the king had no way of showing that he had the right to rule over his kingdom. So it seems difficult to say why a king's rule would be legitimate. It seems more like that the king is just, exerting his power over his subjects, and that's why he says he has the right. But then again, think about a democratic rule. What makes that legitimate? Because the majority of people say so? Why are their voices legitimate? For example, what if a majority of people all voted that a minority of the people should die? Is that legitimate just because it's the majority? It's an interesting puzzle, and I think the same puzzle attaches to this idea of obligation. Why is it good to save innocent lives? Because there's this list of rules that's out there that just says so? Well, why is it good to follow that list? Is it because some one person says it's good? Well, why does that make it good? Really, I think the only solution is this. Assume that God creates all things other than himself. He not only would create the individual things themselves, but he would also invent the natures that they have. So, for example, he would invent what it is to be a human, to be a dog, to be a giraffe, what have you. Now, the nature of a thing dictates the way that it should be. So for humans, for example, it's a good thing to educate your children. It's a bad thing to eat your children. Whereas, say, for a cat, sometimes they eat their children. That's disgusting, but sometimes they eat their children, and I wouldn't say that they're morally wrong for doing so. So the nature of a thing dictates the way that it should be, and the nature is also part of the thing itself. It's in its very being. So what is obligatory for a thing to do is written into its being by God. And if you're not a friend of nature's, if you're maybe some extreme nominalist or something like that, then just fill in like God creates the classes that you're part of or something like that. He creates the resemblances or whatever. So what is obligatory for a thing is written into its being by God. When you ask, why are we obliged to save innocent lives and to not torture babies for fun? Because that's just the kinds of beings we are. It's written into the very fabric of our being. It's written in our very natures that these kinds of things are good for us and these kinds of things are evil. And that is a clue to a possible solution to the Euthyphro Dilemma. So join me next time when we explore a third possible option that would say that this is a false dilemma.